Wealth Without Wall Street Tribe. So glad to be back with you here. Meet our friend Ian Horowitz. Ian, welcome to the show.
What's up, boys? Glad to be here.
Man, I got a lot of questions for you, Ian. But first, our audience may not have found you yet on the interwebs. If they haven't, give a little backstory. I know that you were a firefighter at one point. You were putting out a different kind of fire than you probably are today. What got you into the real estate game?
Yeah, for those that don't know me, my name's Ian Horowitz with Equity Warehouse. You can find us all over the internet. If you want to go digging, we can do that later. But more importantly, what was our story? How do we get up? How do we end up in real estate? The answer is true. I and my business partner both wanted to be big city career firemen. We grew up outside of Philadelphia. You had to live in Philadelphia for your whole career at the time, and it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be stuck to one location. So we started testing all over the country, and we were lucky enough, or maybe not lucky enough, but at this point, I guess it is lucky enough that we got hired by the city of Baltimore. So we got hired in 2007 and 2008, respectively. If you ever watch The Wire, it's 100% true. That's where we worked. If you saw the riots that happened in the 2000 teens, it's all true. That's where we worked. That CVS that was on fire was several blocks from my firehouse. So for me, I've already got to live out a career that was my lifelong dream. And I never in a million years thought that I would be taking a hard left and ending up in a completely different career path just 14 years later after I first got hired.
What's the most important resource that you have? If you really thought about this deeply, I think you'd come to the same conclusion that Joey and I did. It's time. In our newest book, Wealth Without Wall Street, The 3 Steps to Financial Freedom Through Passive Income, we talk about how are we tracking that time? What is the thing that we can do to get more of that time back?
That's right. If you've ever been listening to our podcast and thought, man, it would be amazing if I could take all the things that you guys have learned over the last 10 years and just summarize them, put them in some way to easily digest them and take action, that's what this book is all about. You're not going to want to miss it. Go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/new book and get your copy today. So what happened? What happened that made you change direction that had to, end up way over here on the other side?
So Dan, my business partner, got hired in 2007. I get hired in 2008. You guys already know where this story's going, right? Like, we get hired in the middle of the global financial crisis, but we were taking on a job that allowed us to do what we love, helping people, giving back to the community. In exchange for some less pay, we were supposed to be getting a bunch more security. Well, what happened within months of being hired? I graduate the fire academy and we're getting furloughed. Pension systems all across the country are going bankrupt. California, Detroit, private industries, like, we don't pay Social Security, which is a whole nother racket on top of that, right? But if you think Baltimore City is any better than Detroit, like, you're out of your mind. And I'm sitting around the kitchen table. You got a lot of type A personality type dudes, and you're listening to guys. We're all working side work. We're working days and nights at that point. We would work two 10-hour days, 2 14-hour nights, and then have 4 days off. Well, I'm working before my 2 night works, and then I'm working my 4 days off, and then I'm going back to my day works. I just traded my 5-day-a-week job in exchange for an 8-day-a-week job to grind it out even harder with, like, an unknown future. So for me, it started as just a way to secure my retirement, right? Like, I would watch guys come into work for 40 years, 40, 50 years. There was a lieutenant that I worked with. He worked in the riots in the 60s and the early 2000 teens. And I'm like, Lieutenant, what are you doing? He's like, well, I don't know. I'm institutionalized. And he was stuck. Like, that was scary to me. And then you would see the other guys that would leave after 40 or 50 years. And they'd be like, well, I'm retiring, but I don't make enough money on retirement because I didn't plan properly. My pension's not as much as I thought it was going to be. I'm going to go work at Walmart or Home Depot. And I'm like, well, dude, you just risked your life for 40 years. Like, that's no quality of life. So I really started to think about, how can I make money while I'm at work? But then there's also this other overarching theme that comes up on top of all this, is like, we're in a career path that we can get killed, completely incapacitated, like, never be able to walk again. So, like, a business that I wanted to create had to be something that, God forbid something happened to me, my wife and kids were taken care of. And we weren't wife and didn't have kids then, but that was my future. Like, I'm trying to figure out, how do I secure money to take care of her? God forbid something happens to me. And it's a business. Like, could you imagine having like open construction jobs with deposits? And then it's like, oh yeah, Ian was killed in the line of duty the other day, and now she's responsible for all these open projects. Like, that's scary, right? Like, and at that point, I didn't have that much forethought to be like, well, I can create a business with people in place and not have to worry about it. I just knew that if I bought a piece of real estate, she could hire a manager, she would still get the cash flow, and then she would decide what she wanted to do with the assets to, God forbid, something happened to me. So that was really the thesis behind buying real estate, was nothing more than, how do I do something for the future, and how do I retire or something? And like, my whole goal was to leave with 10 houses that were fully paid off after my 30-year career. And if they were worth $1 million, I would have been so ecstatically happy that I would have retired with $1 million.
Man, thank you, one, for catching us up, two, for your service. We all appreciate that, and live as a result of people like yourself who are doing that job for us and on our behalf. I want to recap a little bit of what you said there, because I think the person listening, whether they're in that sort of career path, they may be in another one. Their corporate job may not look like fighting fires and putting their life on the line every day, but it is this path of 30 to 40 years of grind. And the outcome sometimes looks bleak, right? Because you don't see a lot of people retiring with this fancy lifestyle like that was, pictured on some, financial commercial that we see, during the middle of our football games. And the other part of it is a lot of times we're not surrounded by people who are doing the thing that we think we should go do, because how am I going to do that? I mean, did you have somebody in your life that said, hey, Ian, you can do this, man. You can go out and you can become somebody in the real estate game that can really start to create wealth and income that far exceeds what you're doing now? Or did you just have to just grind it, and all of a sudden it just came true? What was the outcome for you? How did you get there?
So it was a little bit of both. And this will kind of tie into the first part of your question too, is I used to sit in a firehouse with, 8 to 10 other grown men and women who a lot of them live paycheck to paycheck. It's just the nature of the beast. It's the personality type, right? Like, ton of risk aversion. You're willing to run into a burning building or get shot or go kill for this country. Usually money management's not the best skill set. So you got a bunch of guys saying, oh, you're going to be that slumlord of that house we just went to. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be, but just a lot of negativity, a lot of that type A personality of trying to bring, everybody wants to be the champ, trying to bring you down before you ever get started. So I really had to just zone out and not talk to the guys at work about what I was doing. I didn't use them. If they had a contracting business, we stayed away from utilizing other firemen just because we didn't want to hear the naysayers, and then we want to deal with it. My home life, luckily, my wife she experienced entrepreneurship. Her parents owned a company. They sold and serviced outdoor power equipment, and it was just the four of them. So she's always lived in a self-employed household. So luckily for me, she was a little bit better with money, even though my credit was jacked up. But she knew that hey, if we invest this money, there's a chance that it'll be worth more later. So from that standpoint, there was support. But, we're talking 2012, YouTube University is not as popular as what it is today. And I think if you utilize your phone in the correct way today, you can get every piece of information you need to be successful. But for me, I had to find someone who was going to show me the ropes. And, the universe brought me together. Some guy at the firehouse was going to a meeting. I went to this meeting and I met another dude there, and he's like, yeah, I do housing, and I have a bunch of Section 8 houses, and I got hundreds of them. If you really want to learn, call me up. And I was like, okay, dude. So I just picked up the phone, called him up. He showed me around, and I said, dude, I'm in. He said, well, if I ever find a house, I'll call you. A couple weeks go by, he calls me up. And that was it. I was off to the races. I had no clue hard money. I think my first hard money loan was 16 and 6. I had no clue how I was going to refinance it. I thought I had to go do all the construction work. So I was over there doing all the construction work like an idiot. But it was a great learning lesson, and that first deal, when I got it refinanced and my mortgage payment was $450 all in, and my cash flow, my rental income was $1,250 from a Section 8 program. I was like, oh my God, this is more than any overtime shift that didn't exist at that point. I was thinking about all the guys who were putting $20 a week away into retirement accounts. I'm like, dude, your $20 a week is never going to account for anything. Like, I'm making $600-$700 a month on this one house. And I immediately said, how do I rinse and repeat? How do I go pick up side work to get more money to do my next one? Because I knew if I kept pouring into this, I stopped putting money away into, we had a 457 plan, which is kind of like a 401k, but it's like for government employees with no match from the city. But I knew if I put money away, if I stopped putting money away in that and started pouring money back into my business, that I could outperform it. And that one deal, luckily I had success on my first deal that allowed me to have success in my future deals, that ultimately it took a few deals for me to have a failure. But I think the more success you can have on that first deal, the better off you are to recognize what works and what doesn't, and allow you to execute and get away from, I love your guy's name, Wealth Without Wall Street, because how many people will go put $25,000 into, I love Elon to death, right? But let's go put it into his company that we don't know if it's profitable or not, and you'll never get to talk to the man, but yet you can invest in real estate, something that you can control, or invest with somebody like us, who it's like, hey man, like, what's going on with my investment? How does this work? You can go see, feel, and touch the asset. Like, most of the people on Wall Street, you don't have that advantage. So it was always a mind-boggling thing to me of like, why put money into Wall Street when I can put it into something that I can control?
So Ian, it sounds like, and this was a progression of sorts where you went from, hey man, there's some security in this job, to, wait a minute, this is kind of quicksand. There's not really a firm foundation. So let me go figure out where I can start to find cash flow. Was there something about cash flow in particular that stuck out to you? Or were you just like, hey, I'm just going to try to flip a house or create a rental property because that's the only thing I know?
Yeah, so I just knew if we had a rental property, it was like, I guess in real time, I was like, well, if my mortgage is $400 and my rent's $1,000 and I can make $600 a month, I was just ecstatic for that. And I was like, well, $600 for 1 month is like literally what one overtime shift was, and I couldn't even get overtime. And then like house number 2 is like, well, I'd like to buy a new truck and I want to cover that mortgage, that payment with an asset. And that was purchase number 2. Like, cause I was like, well, I got 20 grand. I can go put it down on a truck, or I can go buy a house and get it to make me $500-$600. I read Banker's Code, George Anton, real early on, and like that whole thought process of like buying an asset to then cover a liability like really resonated with me. But then from there, like it really turned into, we built a rental portfolio before we flipped houses, because the cash flow was like more intriguing to me. The thought process of someone paying down a mortgage over a 30-year time horizon. Like, again, I'm talking about Baltimore City, Baltimore County, low class B, high class C, just like grinder type stuff that I was like, well, if it's worth $150 today, and in 30 years, it's still worth $150. And over that 30-year time horizon, if I made $500 a month, I was that naive at that point, and I can make that every month for the next 30 years, and the thing's paid off, and I got 10 of them, cool. It's $1 million to $1.5 million. And if appreciation happens, great. And there was really no more thought process behind that other than like, well, I know if I got consistent cash flow coming in, that maybe one day I could quit my job. And that was really it, versus getting large sums of money and like flipping houses, which we did, which really built our company because we really started to like scale it from there. But doing that, like, it was more like, well, you make 30 grand on this one and maybe you make 0 grand on this one, or maybe you'll lose 10 grand on the next one. It's like, that's not predictable. Like, the rental income in my mind, like, just clearly fit to me to be like, this is predictable income. I can retire my wife. I can pay my liabilities. I could ultimately retire myself based on this consistent cash flow, and the flips would be bonuses to us, is kind of how we viewed it.
There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, pop quiz day. Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared, though, for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz. I love just to hear the behind the scenes, like what were you thinking? Because that helps everybody who's listening right now who's in the same boat, who's thinking, one, either I need more income because my 9 to 5 is just not cutting it, or more importantly, I need to, as you said, retire my wife or to retire myself. And cash flow, to your point, is the freedom aspect, right? When your passive income exceeds your monthly expenses, you now can create your calendar. It's no longer dictated from the fire department in this case, right? But it could be for whatever, you fill in the blank on your 9 to 5. So talk to me about, that's where it started. How did it start to then flow from there? Like one house, two houses, like from year to year, what was the progression and like the upside from there?
Okay, so like one thing I never want to discount is like I bought my first house in 2012, and from 2012 to basically early 2014, I did 10 rental houses on my own. And I was doing landscaping jobs. I was working, guys would pay you to work extra shifts. I was helping a guy sell some houses, turnkey rentals just to make it. I would do anything it took to make an extra buck to be able to buy these 10 rental houses. And then my business partner approached me in 2014. He was wholesaling. He got caught up. He was a fireman, bought a house, tried refinancing it. 2010 was the absolute bottom. He gets, jammed up, he's got some credit card, bad debt, that type of stuff going on. And he's like, I'm never doing that again. So he starts wholesaling, and we connected on a package of houses, and we grew up together. And in 2014, he said, hey, I got this package of 4 properties. I want to wholesale 3 of them, and I want to flip the 4th. And, hustling those other houses, I was like, well, I got a guy that'll buy 2 of these. Let's sell them. We sold the other one, and then we flipped the house. And I think we made like 140, 150 grand, something like that on that one deal. And I was like, yo, dude, you want to do that again? And he's like, yeah, let me see what I can find another flip, and off we went. Now, what I'm getting at is, look, guys, like we hit tailwinds, massive tailwinds. We were not smart enough to recognize like that was the absolute bottom of the market, and you could buy stuff, and we were screwing up left and right, and it was worth more money the next day. Like, I didn't know that. Like, we hit the absolute right time of this market. So from 2014, so I paused building my rental portfolio. We joined forces 2014 to 2016. We flipped roughly, I don't know, right around 100 houses, 150 houses, something like that. We were cranking out 30 to 50 houses a year, just like grinding. Because again, you could go on MLS, buy anything you want, throw an offer at it. They would accept it, off you would go. There, wholesalers weren't really like, it was easier to go to MLS than it was for me to go to wholesalers. Then from 2016 till 2000, right around 19, we built about another 100 house portfolio. But this time, instead of flipping them, because everything we were flipping were starter homes, we had a capital partner come to us and said, well, why don't you just keep them? And it never crossed our mind, but we went back to what I first started on of you know what? Flipping's cool. It's a lot of cash, but it also chews up a lot of cash because you're feeding the machine, buying the next deal. There's no consistent cash flow. And when we built that next 100 house portfolio, this time it was for us. And we kept them as rentals. And it was you know what? We would have loved to sell this, but we're actually glad we kept this. And it's now a rental in our portfolio. So in that 5-year period, we did about 200 houses, and we really scaled our company. We hired Ryan, who's I call him our head of operations because I refuse the word COO, but he runs our operation. We hired a maintenance guy. We hired an office manager, Raquel. We started bringing in staff, and we're making hires of people who are more than our fire department salary, which was wild, right? We're writing checks to the government that are more than our fire department salary. And then we got staff that are getting paid more than we're working in the fire department, which was wild. But it became clear to us that it was cool, we can flip houses, or we could turn them into rentals, or we could do any construction project. We have Ryan that frees up our time to go concentrate on taxes, operations, building the back end to really start to build and scale. And our first hire was Ryan as a project manager, who's now in charge of our whole operation. he was probably the most pivotal hire that we made that allowed us to get to the next level and the next level and the next level.
So you go back through all of this in your mind, and I'm sure you and Dan have probably done this. You mentioned one thing that you recognized that, hey, I had some tailwinds going, but also that you were selling stuff that wasn't giving you consistent cash flow. If you had to go back and start all over again, what would you have told yourself, 15 years ago that you know now?
There's a few things, like specifically in regards to this. I would have kept, we joke about it all the time, we would have kept more houses and basically just like land banked them, even if we didn't fix them up. I mean, from 2016, we were buying shells.
Land bank, what is that? I'm not familiar with that term.
Basically just buying them and not even fixing them up and just, servicing the taxes and just kind of protecting the asset. Like, give you an example, we were buying shells from $5 to $25,000. And from 2016 to 2018, those same shells were trading anywhere from 30 to 80 grand. So it's like, dude, you could have bought it, done none of the headache, paid taxes for 3 years, and turned around and sold them off, not having to do all the hard work. Those that are watching this, I have gray hair and no hair on top of my head because we decided to renovate everything that we did. Number two is I probably would have skipped the flipping or would have flipped a little less and kept more houses in our portfolio, because our learning lessons that, like, I'm going to kind of skip forward here is, like, we learned how to go to approach a bank. Like, me and Dan, dude, like, we were like, well, Dan just had like this issue with, a borderline bankruptcy, and I had an issue with my credit score, and like we were afraid to approach banks. And once we did and had a capital partner show us, like, we found out that the lending institutions really loved our story and really loved that we were building the community back. Like, we probably could have gotten better bank financing. Like, we did all the no doc loan crap and all this other crap. And one day we're like, dude, we're all in. Like, we're signing our lives away. Like, we're going to sign the personal guarantee. We are all in on this. And I wish we would have done that sooner, because I think our growth would have been exponential, because we would have had a different exit strategy rather than just taking them to market to sell.
And how long did it take when you guys started this, before you guys left the fire department?
Oh, way too long. Way too long. Media groups, guys saying, well, why don't you just bet on yourself? You talk about risk in the corporate world. Like, the risk is you're working for somebody and you're trusting that they're going to take care of you and be there for you. And the risk is that when you get to the end of your career, that, like, all these things work out rather than making it work today. But we actually didn't leave till 2022. So basically 10 years after we started. And a lot of it was identity crisis, right? Like, all we cared about our whole lives was being big city career firemen, right? Like, we graduated in 2001, 9/11 happens. Like, the fire department is like the most celebrated thing, right? Like, it was a highly competitive job that we earned, and we did get to go to fires and we did get to help people. So there was this identity crisis. We outperformed our careers, and we should have left 5 years sooner, which was also another learning lesson, that the day we left, we tripled our business. So the question is, if we would have left 5 years earlier, would it have been feast or would it have been famine? But this is the trajectory that we took.
So I just have a question, Ian, for the person who is listening right now, who is where you were in 2012, it sounds like, or excuse me, 2010, I guess it sounds like, where you really started to invest in these things. What is that person dealing with right now mentally that they need to get over? What's the hurdle that you would say, man, if you can just do this one thing, it opens up everything?
Yeah, well, we're recording this episode pre-elections, right? And it's so easy to get caught up in the noise. And that's the only reason I bring it up. I don't care who you're voting for, just go vote, right? But in the end, there's so much noise around it. Well, it's the same thing of you trying to get started. And, like, I just think back, I remember sitting, so when my first firehouse was a lot of senior dudes that were on the back end of their career. It was more of a retirement house. I just remember all those dudes saying how crazy I was, how bad the city is, how bad that's going to be. I can't believe you're doing this. Why would you want to, there was a lot of opinions in the firehouse. Why would you want to give government house rentals? You're just perpetuating the system. If I would have listened to those dudes, I don't think I ever would have gotten started. I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd probably still be going to work, right? So with that being said, is like, you got to block it out. The other big thing is, luckily for me, YouTube University, social media, all that other noise that's out there, well, it's good when used the right way. There is a lot of noise. You need to lock in to a set way to invest. Like, podcasts weren't even that big in 2010, 12, that era, right? Like, and you really need to figure out what investment vehicle you want to lock into. And that could be, you want to be the operator, you want to be the lender, you just want to co-invest. It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you know what you're doing with your capital. You might say, you know what, Ian, I really love my job, but I just want to know there's an additional security blanket. Well, that's cool too. You need to be your own family office and figure out how to manage your money. And I think too many people, again, that learning lesson of what are they thinking, what do they need to get out of their head is, you need to create your own way and you need to bet on yourself. I heard that, I don't know how many times before I quit, and it finally resonated with me that you need to bet on yourself and figure out what's right for you and your family.
Now, let's kind of fast forward to today. Talk a little bit about some of the projects you guys are working on and how that has transitioned from what you guys started doing.
Yeah, so today we primarily concentrate on commercial real estate, mostly storage and industrial, some ground up development in those spaces. With that being said, like 2019, the market really, really slowed down. It allowed me an opportunity to go out and learn about new opportunities besides single family. And for my business partner and Ryan, our operations manager, really allowed them to refine our system and show us what we're good at. And what we found we're good at is value add and doing construction. So we bought a couple multifamily deals, but it was not repeatable in our metro market just because we're in the Northeast. It's insanely competitive, and we have a lot of trauma around watching guys come in from DC and New York and put all this money into Baltimore and just get screwed. So we were like afraid to buy residential real estate outside of a market that we controlled. But we stumbled on self-storage that allowed us to go and invest in other markets outside of our comfort level, a lot down in the Southeast, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, in states that were much more business friendly. And we were doing this during COVID. COVID really, really showed us who was in charge and who wasn't when it came to consumers. And residential real estate is really a consumer commodity, right? And they really showed that, like, you're not in control. But in self-storage, we were still in control of our assets. We were still able to increase rents. We were able to continue to do lien laws or auctions to get people out. We were completely in control of our asset. And when we saw that, we said, you know what? Residential real estate's cool, but it's easier for me to get a $5 million loan than it is a $100,000 loan. And it's easier to do work on one project than it is hundreds of houses. And we made the switch completely into commercial real estate, where we've really created nice wealth, nice cash flow. And today we're completely concentrating on, actually, we got a project upcoming. It's cool. We're taking an office building and converting it into flex space, like contractor type storage, where, your HVAC or your plumber or dance studio, something along those lines, would rent and run their businesses out of. So that's what our primary concentration has been over this past year.
I love it, man. I can see, I just love having a show like this where we can uncover your journey, because there's so many people that need to hear more and more of this to break through the noise. I love that you pointed that out, Ian, that the noise is so loud. It's loud in, you can't manage your own finances. Like that message is clear. That's a Wall Street message. And we have to cut through that. That's the name of Wealth Without Wall Street. It's like, you have to break away from that mindset and do what you said, become your own family office, but you have to think like a business. So I also love how you went from, just building your own first and second rentals to eventually being like, hey, we have an actual business. We're actually hiring people. We're actually scaling, and we have to have people with talent. And man, what a richer, more full kind of way to see the world in general. So Ian, I just can't thank you enough for being on the show, being willing to share your story with our audience. For those that want to connect with you, what would be the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, you can go check out CRE-syndicate.com. I'm actually doing a $50 million acquisition challenge. A buddy of mine was doing $1 million wholesale challenge, trying to go from $0 to $1 million in 6 months. And I said, "Oh yeah, well, I'll outdo you." And I don't know if it was a smart idea or not, but we're trying to buy $50 million of real estate back end value by the end of this year. We're sitting at like 38, 40 million bucks if everything closes. So I don't know if I'm going to hit my goal. But I like to hop on there, document what's going on. Some days are more busy than others, but we underwrite deals on there. We're showing people how to take that next step. And it could be, it's your first deal, or you've been in the single family space and you're like, how do I get to the next level? And this is really the way we do it. We show people how we're underwriting, executing on deals, capital raising, and all the other fun stuff.
Man, Ian, thank you so much again for sharing your story. It's inspirational to us to hear it. And for those who are trying to figure out what next steps to take, and it's listening to guys like yourself who took the big leap, right? As you mentioned, it was a risk. But the last thing I would have you just mention is 2 years ago, you walked away from the fire department. You talked about all of the regrets of, man, I wish I would have done it this earlier. I wish I would have done that differently. But in the last 2 years, like, what have been just one or two of those things that you've just been able to soak in and go, man, this is amazing? That's not necessarily financially related, because I think that's what it's about, right?
Yeah, well, I actually had the opportunity to speak to this high school class the other day, and I felt a little weird, but I was trying to explain to them, like, wealth is not all about money. Wealth is about time freedom. That's, to me, the true definition of success. So, like last night I had to coach soccer for my one daughter. Tonight I'm coaching softball for my other daughter. And the availability to be present, eating breakfast with them in the morning, as simple as that sounds, or being home for dinner on time most of the time, just being fully present in that fashion, like, I don't think people realize. And I think COVID showed some of that to people that got out of their normal grind, but everybody's back in the grind now. Everybody's going back to the office and doing their thing. And really, the number one thing is the time freedom. No more trying to figure out, hey, can you work for me on Christmas? You guys can check out my last name. It's not very Catholic, but my Irish Catholic wife loves Christmas, and my daughters love Christmas, more importantly. So, trying to fight all these other guys to be like, hey, I need to get off to go work Christmas, or to be home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays, or just simply being home for a game and being able to be fully present, not worrying about having to go to work, because that stuff weighs on you. I don't care if you're a first responder or you're a corporate America person. Nowadays, with phones, emails, access to you 24/7, that stuff just lives on you. And being able to clear that and have your own freedom and control your own destiny, I think, is true definition of wealth and actually being rich.
I love that. Well, Ian, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's a great pleasure to hear it.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it.
All right, Tribe. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value, take time and rate and review the show. If you're interested in what Ian and Dan are up to, either head over to Equity Warehouse or go to CRE-syndicate.com and connect with them there. Have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.